Hello and welcome to West Virginia Author. I'm your host Gordon Simmons, and it's an extreme pleasure to have back with us here today Steve Shaluta, one of West Virginia's premier photographers, with 2 books as opposed to 1. That's pretty nice to get 2 books published at once.
Yeah, it just kind of happened that they both came out at the same time. I'd been working on them at separate intervals, but it just so happened they came out at the same time. I think it's cheaper to get them published at the same time. Get them
Probably with the printing. And
so it just kind of was coincidence they came out at the same.
Well, let's talk about West Virginia beauty first. That's something I think folks who are familiar with your work will recognize because there's a lot of nature shots and the sort of thing that you're so well known for. It also it has a subtitle, Familiar and Rare, so that I guess indicating that if the kind of images, photographic images people associate with West Virginia can be found there, but then some things that are a little more quirky or unusual, off the beaten path, I guess.
That's Jeannie's idea, you know, our co-author, her
Jeannie
idea.
Mosier.
Yes, Jeannie Mosier is a co-author, and it was her idea to do that. She comes up with great ideas. You know, I'm the photographer. I take the photos and we lay them all out, and she and the publisher pick out the.
So she helped with the selection.
Oh, yes.
As well as writing all the captions.
Sure.
And so forth.
Yeah, what I normally do is pick out somewhere between 1,000, 2,000 images, and then we whittle that down and just keep whittling it down until we get what we want to.
Okay, so Jeannie was probably the source for some of the non-nature shots, I would guess.
Oh, sure. Yeah, she you know, she just has a different eye. I'm a nature photographer, and so I'm always thinking that I want a bird or flower or a scene in there. And Jeannie sees the broader picture of West Virginia, and so she would want something like the logging trucks we have in there, and Clay Center, things like this. She's very interested in, and she sees this where I'm kind of a tunnel vision when it comes to photography. I have nature on my mind always.
Well, West Virginia Beauty is what I guess called a coffee table book. It's a large format hardcover with color photographs throughout.
Right.
It's the kind of gift item or remembrance item that people look for maybe even visitors to the state would appreciate.
Well, that seems to be the biggest sales are for gifts and people from out of state. They're sending them to people from out of state.
Okay, now some of the nature shots are really large, detailed photographs of very small objects.
Yeah, macro. It just so happens I purchased a ring light for my macro lens so I could do little animals. And before I didn't have the ring light, I would just use flashes separately, but it's hard to chase little animals when you have off-camera flash. And so everything I would see around my house, most of it's around my house, I would photograph. I have the little spider, very little spider. It's I don't even remember the name of it right now. Bold jumping spider. And I was sitting on the edge of my deck, and I saw this little teeny spider about half the size of my fingernail on my little finger. And I thought, well, I'll try this lens out. So I put the macro on and got it down to 1:1. And boy, when I saw him, he's really beautiful. And I chased him around my deck, photographed him, harassing him. And then when the photos came out, it was just wonderful. I mean, he just had this great character, looked like one of Godzilla's friends or something. So yeah, I have a lot of macro. And then the cicada, our 17-year cicada, was going on while I was photographing this. And close-up of those is always good. You can always, with those big red eyes.
Well, nature's your field. I mean, that's your forte.
My real love. Yeah.
So it's not surprising that you would photograph that sort of thing and get a lot of those natural shots in there. But you actually did take these other photographs even before the selection process.
Oh, sure.
Like the logging truck, for example.
Yeah, I do a lot of freelance work for businesses and convention and visitors bureaus and companies. And so while I'm out, I just take, and those are all my photos. I have the option to use them as I want to. So that's where a lot of these come from, because that's what the particular client wanted. He's wanting to document their area, and so I get a lot of photos like that. And it makes my job a little more interesting, it's because even though I love shooting nature, it's nice to have a little bit of variety.
Well, we've got some images, I think, that are from this book that sort of give a taste for. Here's for example, this old vehicle. It's definitely not something that's natural.
No, but I have this obsession like I did with Mail Pouch Barnes for a while, I have this obsession with abandoned vehicles. And so anytime I see abandoned vehicles, I photograph them in the state. I just like them. The older, the better. And so I have a pretty good selection of abandoned vehicles. Anytime I pass one, you know, I stop, I'll turn around, I'll go back and take a photo of it. And this just happens to be one over in Jackson County. It's an old fire truck, which was really a nice one to have.
Well, now, when the idea for the book came up, here's a typical nature shot, but when the idea for the book came up, did you already have a store of photographs, or did you do a lot of new ones for this? Or?
I really didn't do too much. You know, I have so many photos. There may be just a few that Jeannie would specifically like to have, or something that needs to be updated. I did update the Clay Center. I had to update it because, you know, it changed since our last book. And it's even changed since I've taken that photo. Now they've put a, you know, a really large statue in front of it.
Right.
And
sculpture.
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of them I just have. You know, I have a lot of friends that are photographers, and we just kind of travel around and take photos, and we just kind of shoot everything that gets in our way.
Yeah, but it gives a good cross section of the state. I mean, this is an incredible variety.
Oh yeah, like the shot of the osprey at the nest. That was one that, you know, I planned. Of course, that's my nature shot, and I waited around for about 4 hours for the parent to bring in a fish to the fledglings.
Well, in a shot like this, you do have to be pretty patient for getting just the right shot.
But that's what I do. You know, I can do that because that's not, to me, that's easy doing that. And this is the cicada we talked about, the big red eyes, a close-up. You know, people hear them and they see them everywhere. But when you really see them close up, they're pretty intimidating.
Different, awesome creature.
Yeah.
And
the fox, this one was really interesting. I happened to be driving down the road somewhere up near the Huttonsville prison, and I saw just a little red dot in the field, and it just didn't look normal in this snowy field, little red dot. So I stopped and I pulled off and I put on the telephoto lens, and this is what I saw with the long lens, is this little fox sitting right out in the middle of this field in the midday. And so to me, it was just such a great opportunity to get this unusual shot of the fox just sitting out there and they're laying out there in the field.
Pretty fortuitous. Do you find that happens with your photos, that sometimes you're just lucky?
It happens a lot more than people think. But I think a lot of it is that I'm prepared. You know, I've been doing this for so long. You know, I have lens with me. I was doing a job for the state a few weeks ago, or actually just last week, in Kincapin, and I was shooting the insides of cabins. Now this was for the state, but I was shooting the inside of cabins, and I look out the window and there's a bear. And this is midday. There's a bear outside the cabin. So at first, you know, I try to shoot him through the window, but it doesn't work too well because the old cabins have that wavy glass in them. Didn't want to scare him away, so I watched him for about 15 minutes because, you know, just enjoy watching the bear, you know, dig around and eating Jack in the Pulpit. That's what he was doing.
Okay.
And so finally I thought, well, I got to get a photo. So I went out on the porch, got in the shadows, and the first shot I got of him out there, of course I had my long telephoto with me. I was ready. I know how to use that. I'm very quick with it. And he smelled me. So he lifted his nose up and his eyes up, and I got 1 or 2 good shots, and then a car came along and he ran, and then the rest of the shots were in not so good light. But you know, just being ready, the opportunity, you know, I'm just doing this so long, it's kind of like a second nature. I see these things. And a lot of people may have thought it was just a black blob in the woods, but, you know, I thought, well, it looks different.
If you're ready for it, and it comes along, you got it.
So I think a little bit of it, you know, one thing about getting older is you get that experience.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
Well, you use telephoto a lot. You mentioned the micro.
Yes, I don't use the macro a lot, but I do use it, you know, especially on bugs and butterflies and things like that. But the biggest reason I bought the macro was for, in my freelance work, I have to shoot a lot of close-ups of maybe jewelry when I'm doing arts and crafts.
Small objects.
Yeah, small objects. And that's really what I bought it for. And then I bought the extra flash so that I could chase bugs around. And it just gives you a little, you know, another aspect of photography that I haven't done for a while, and it kind of tries to keep me fresh and interested in what I'm doing. Because as much as I love nature photography, you know, if you do it day after day and you go to the same places all the time, and sometimes you say, well, what am I going to do different this time?
Right, you don't want to get stale or anything.
Right, and sometimes I do feel I get stale, so I need to do something to kind of spice it up a little bit.
Well, you have a second book,
Yes.
which is the mail pouch book.
Right.
Now, tell us about the significance of mail pouch barns.
Well, Mail Pouch is a West Virginia company. The Block brothers started that. It was in Wheeling, and they developed the chewing tobacco. It was the cuttings from their cigars. And somebody in the company, I'm not sure the exact story, I know it vaguely, the men would always chew this and go home, and somebody thought, well, you know, maybe we can do something with
Market this thing.
Market it. So they did. And then they were one of the first companies, or maybe the first, that used outdoor advertisement, like on barns. They painted on the side of barns and on the side of buildings. And so it was, you know, it was very unique to West Virginia. It's kind of a West Virginia bred thing. And, you know, over the years I've traveled and I see these mail pouch barns everywhere, and they're disappearing fast, really fast. You don't realize how fast. So one day, a friend of mine, Larry Belcher, years ago in the about 90s, he wanted to photograph all the barns and do a book. That was his idea. So the idea was originally his.
It's sort of like going around and finding all the covered bridges that are left
Sure,
and doing
yeah.
those together. And
But he never did it. So you know, 20 years later, I decided I wanted to do it. So I made a trip to Mail Pouch, and I got their old historical records where these things were, got my gazetteer out, and I spent 2 years just traveling around finding these barns. And I think I found most of them. There might be a few that I've missed. And I also included buildings, anything that had the Mail Pouch sign on it and was original too.
so these were not only like mostly barns, but all over the state.
Sure.
They are, as you say, disappearing. And I believe you mentioned to me at one point that some of the photography you were able to get, those buildings are gone already.
Oh yeah, they're already gone. One particular photo I have is the very first mail pouch that I had actually taken. It was back in the 80s, and it was of a mail pouch barn that it had fallen down, and the way it had fallen down on both sides, it said "ouch." And so that's what caught my eye. And then there was an old Jeep in front of it, an abandoned car in front of it. So I photographed that one, and I had that for years, and it held my interest. But I always looked for, you know, pretty barns or something interesting, you know, as a nature photographer, a landscape photographer. But then when I saw the historical significance to me, that this is just a book, it's like the covered bridges. I'd like to record as many of them as I can at this time, because they're going to be gone. And since the books, you know, I did the photography several years ago, there's been probably 10 of the barns that I've photographed that have fallen down in those last few years.
Well, was there any attempt, or has there been any attempt to preserve some of these signs?
You have to preserve them yourself because it's against the law to advertise. A mail pouch cannot do that.
So they have to be historical artifacts that the owner would...
Right, the owner would restore. He's allowed to restore them, but mail pouch cannot do that because it's advertising tobacco. Like I'm thinking, I have a small outbuilding. I live along the Coal River, and I have a small outbuilding. And now that the book's out, I think I'm going to paint on one side of it. I'm going to paint a mail pouch bar. My wife's going to do it, not me, because she's the artist. She can do it. So I think I may do that just to have.
Is there any idea how many mail pouch signs there were originally, or at least at the high point?
They really don't have a record. You know, West Virginia has a lot, but Ohio really has a lot. Pennsylvania has a lot, but Ohio is the big place. They have 400 something. In West Virginia, we have 147 left. No one really knows how many there were at one time, because, you know, it's even like the covered bridges. No one really knows how many there were, say, at the peak. They would come and go, get washed away in a flood or torn down, or
There would be a census book somewhere with all that in there, right?
I would think there would be, but there's not. You know, I have never found anything like that. I mean, I went through the archives at the Mail Pouch, pretty good, and they have some nice photos. And
As an advertising technique, it's kind of inspired, though.
it really has. Yes, it really has, because it was the first to do that. So it's like the first outdoor advertising, you know, for a product like that.
Pre-billboard.
Right, you know, because people would, if they owned a building and it was their company, they would paint their name on the side of it. But to paint this product that had nothing to do with that building on the side and advertise it, it was probably one of the first, if not the first.
So what was the actual technique? You'd have a painter, he'd go around looking for likely sites. Would they pay the owners of the barn?
I'm not sure how much. It wasn't much. It was like I think the owners liked it because they got their barn painted.
Right, right.
And I think that was the big technique. And there was a gentleman named Zimmerman who was one of the very first in like the 20s and 30s. And then Harley Warwick was the last male pouch barn painter. And he was the one who really painted most of the last barns. Anything that has Harley Warwick's initials on it is one you really want to photograph, or if you have anything of Harley Warwick, because he passed away in 2000. And you know, they have a festival every year in his hometown in Ohio that honors him. And I mean, there's a national website, a national club, malepouchbarn.com, or malepouchbarn.org or something.
Right.
Like
So it's very much like the covered bridges. They're
yeah.
a quaint image that was common at one point, but they've become an image of the past, the
Sure.
pre-industrial past in this
Yeah,
case.
and unless the owner decides to paint that barn, they're going to fade away. The covered bridges have been restored, but the male pouch barns, they're just disappearing. They're disintegrating. Some of them I photographed. There's one in Preston County that has male pouch on the front, and on the side it had a faded male pouch, and I photographed both of those. Now you can't even see the one on the side. It's so faded that the last time I was up there, you can't even tell that it's ever said male pouch.
I believe you told me one of the barns you photographed, you went back to later, and someone had actually cut out the actual sign, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was
Decoration, or-
stolen, because these people, antique dealers, would like to have these, or so maybe somebody would sell it. But I photographed it 1 month. I came back the next month, and this barn had a big sign on one end, and then a smaller sign on the other end. And somebody had just taken all the boards. They just taken all the boards out where the male pouch was, and there was a big hole in the side of the barn. So you never know what's going to happen to them, so I'm glad I did this. It's kind of like a historical thing. It's like the abandoned cars. To me, that's history. It's part of our culture, part of our history, and I just like to record that.
So you said a moment ago, but I didn't catch it. How long have you been doing the male pouch signs?
Well, really, intently doing it so that I could record them. I started it, I think it's in my book. I have bad memory. I'm old now. I think from 2002 maybe to 2005, I worked on tracking all those down, really intently tracking them down and
Is
photographing.
that when you went to Wheeling and checked out?
Oh yeah, went all over. I mean, I just found out where they were, and it just drove. It took a lot of weekends, a lot of time just driving around, and then I could find them when I'm on photo shoots for the state. I could, you'd pass one, you'd make a note of where it was, and then I had to record the directions, because when you look in that book, you can use it as a guidebook. It gives you directions exactly to each barn. So if you want to go on a trip and say you want to hunt for the male pouch barns up north, you can take that book and
So
you
your
can find
book will tell you where to find this one,
Yeah,
and where
exactly.
to find that one.
Right down to the 0.2 miles or whatever. It'll tell you how to get to them.
So you mentioned they're also in Ohio, we're in
Yes.
Pennsylvania. That's probably the extent of the company's real reach, or?
Well, not really. They extend on out. There's quite a few in Indiana, and there's a few even out in California.
Oh.
Kentucky has a few. Surprisingly, Kentucky doesn't have much, but they had their own Kentucky Club tobacco, see. So,
Okay.
they had their own. They started advertising it on barns also. But, yeah, and Virginia has a few, but Ohio and Pennsylvania are the real male pouch barn meccas.
So from the first painter, Zimmerman, I think you said?
I'm not sure if he was the first. He was the
One of the
first
early
one.
ones?
One of the first.
And so would you be able to recognize his by his signature, or initials?
I don't even know if any of his are left.
Okay.
Because Harley started doing it in the 40s.
But he always initialed his,
Yeah,
so you know his.
yeah. He initialed his, and so it tells the date. So and if he repainted them, he'd put another date that he'd
So
repainted.
you got the history of the sign itself right there.
Yeah, Harley is kind of like the legend. He has his own book. His son and daughter did a book of the last male pouch barn painter, and so he's kind of the legend. You know, I got to meet him one time before he passed away. So, but that was before I was really interested. But I still had got to meet him. He was painting at, I think, the Arts and Craft Fair or something.
Wow. Okay. Well, this is an oversized book, but it's a paperback, so it's a
Right.
lot cheaper, more popular format than the West Virginia Beauty book,
Right.
and more for, I guess, the enthusiast of that sort of bygone era,
Sure.
and that sort of thing. Had you ever thought about, like you mentioned, another enthusiasm of yours is older vehicles? Have you ever thought of just doing an entire catalog of some of the junk cars you've run
Well,
across?
you know, you can think all you want, but you have to have a publisher interested.
Yeah.
And you know, if you can't get a publisher interested in it, you know, it's probably not going to do you much good. But oh yeah, I think of that, and I have the, you know, I
You've got
have
the
my
material,
list.
right?
Yeah, I even have some from a few other states, but most of mine are just West Virginia, and they're hard to find. You know, in the '60s, A. James Mansion went through and cleaned out a lot of those old cars, so it's harder and harder to find them now. But there's still quite a few out there. You'd be surprised.
May not have the same kind of fan following that Mel Pouch would have.
No, probably not. I mean, I'm sure that, you know, I'm not a smoker, and I don't, you know, am not an advocate of it. But you know, to me, it's Americana. It's our history, and that's what I think about Mel Pouch. And I think with the cars, it's Americana. It's part of our history, and it's fading away. And I like history, and so I just kind of hate to see it fade away. So
Sure.
being a photographer, I can record that.
Can keep it there.
Right.
Well, let's go back to West Virginia Beauty for a moment. And mention that it was kind of a variety of different kind of photographs, and that Jeannie Mosier had done all the sort of taglines or captions.
The captions,
for that.
yeah. And only the way Jeannie can do them, you know.
Right. She's got a quirky sense of humor too.
Oh,
And does that work into the captions?
Yes, it does, and it's wonderful. Her captions are always wonderful. She was saying it's like she had to do 180 little stories. She had to research 180 stories because she wanted to be sure they were accurate. So she went in and researched every photo to make sure that the location or the name of the certain telescope that we photographed, and she even tracked down the name of some people which I didn't have the name of that were in there. She tracked down the names of them, and so she could put that in there.
Well, you mentioned that telescope. That was an interesting shot. Now tell a story how that telescope came to be there in is it Berkeley County?
Yeah, it's Morgan County.
Morgan County.
It's in Morgan County, and of course that's Jeannie's home county.
Right.
And so she wanted me to go out and photograph their observatory, which is really nice, very nice observatory, very small, but it's very nice. So I went out at night, and I, you know, used colored lights and took photos inside and out. And, wanted to do star trails, but it was cloudy that night, so we couldn't do that outside. But the actual telescope came from the Naval Observatory, and somehow it's like one of a kind telescope. And it's really big. It's a big telescope, and it's one of a kind. And it was either donated or they got it for super cheap for this observatory that they started there in Berkeley County.
And so the school kids and communities and
Sure.
whatnot have access to this as a regular feature that's available to them.
Sure, and it's a great telescope. I mean, it's really big, and you know, it's a nice telescope to have. But evidently, it's extremely rare. It has very good glass in it, and you know, the government built it, so
Well, this better be good.
it's gotta be good.
And the Naval Observatory would probably have a good piece of equipment, I would suspect. But so Jeannie dug out the stories for all of these different shots, the people involved, what was behind the scene, I guess, that
Sure.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
And with the nature shots, she would have to do a little bit different research, would she?
Well, you know, of course, I had those captioned accurately where they were and all, but you know, she did research about certain little mushroom, how common or uncommon it was, and the place that I photographed it, if it was maybe there were a lot of mushrooms in that particular park or area of the national forest I was out at. So you know, she really researched well. I mean, you know, I'm just a more or less meat and potatoes man. I put, you know, this is a flower. You know,
Right.
what kind of flower? If I know that, I have that. That what kind of flower, and then she'll go into detail and find out. So we work well together as a combination, because if I did the captions, that's what they would say. It would say Daisy, you know,
Right.
yeah, Daisy taken in Pocahontas County or something like that, and it'd be, you know, so Jeannie puts that little oomph in the captions.
Well, I think you mentioned to me that one of the projects you've got forthcoming is a sort of a small, portable nature guide.
Right.
This will be animals, right?
Yeah, just West Virginia wildlife. It'll be like birds and insects and animals, and so I've been traveling a little bit to get photos. I have a lot of animals, but there's a few that are a little more rare. I went to the West Virginia game farm to photograph fisher this winter because a fisher is one animal that went extinct, and they reintroduced it, and it's doing very well. But the chance of me seeing one in the wild and getting a photograph of it would be extremely rare.
Well, maybe you will know this, but we always hear these stories about very large cats roaming in Pocahontas County or something. Are these all true? Are they apocryphal? Or?
I have some very good friends. They've passed away now, very good friends, who saw mountain lions on dolly sods. And these are bird watchers, people who identify birds by the bands on their wings and slight coloring on their head.
Small details, in other words.
Very small details. And I do not doubt that these folks at all, that they have seen them. How they've got there, that would be, another bone of contention. I do think the DNR will finally maybe admit now that these are probably cats that people got as pets, thought it was cute to get a baby mountain lion as a pet. Then it got too much to handle, so they've released it. And I think they do believe there's probably, and over the last maybe 20, 25 years or more, maybe longer than that, a breeding population of these kind of cats.
But they were reintroduced. They weren't really
Well, no
maintained.
one's really going to know, because could there have been a few that survived? Who knows, I think it was one of my wife's relatives that killed the last one in Pocahontas County or Webster County somewhere. She's a Hamrick on her mother's side, and I think it was a Hamrick that killed the...
And that would have been about when?
Early 1900s, maybe late 1800s. Yeah.
Shortly after the time they pretty much deforested
right,
the state.
because that eliminated the deer, and that
The
was
habitat,
their main source of food were deer. So, but they've killed some in '69, but they said their paws were wore down like they'd been on concrete, or they're
domesticated.
So you never know. But if there's a population out there now, they are. They're breeding in the wild and have been for quite a while. But they're pretty elusive. But I want to be the man who gets the photo of
first
one
shot of
in
that.
West Virginia. I have one in the book, and I'd love to say it was in West Virginia, but it wasn't. But I put it in there, and Jeannie put it in. I said, we have to have this because too many people see these things. Right. And we need to have this in here because there are people who have actually seen this. You're not going to convince them otherwise.
Right, right.
And
I've heard stories.
me
I've
too.
been in Randolph County a few weeks ago, and they had photographs out there on the desk of the Commission on Aging. It looked pretty good to me.
Yeah, but you're going to have to get one leaning on a sign that says dolly sods this way or something, right. Because now with Photoshop and everything, it's really going to be hard to get someone to believe it unless you. I just don't know what you're going to have.
Maybe you get one holding up a newspaper.
Yeah,
like a Gazette from yesterday.
Say here, can you hold this? But so that's going to be a difficult. But yeah, I'm a firm believer that I really do think they're out there. Whether they're from the native population, I don't know, but I'm a firm believer they're there.
Well, there's enough nature in West Virginia to probably fill a few other books. So
yeah,
I look forward to that, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh,
and having these two books at once. It's
glad
kind
I
of
could do it.
Extra pleasure in that.
Yeah, well, I'm really happy to be here, and appreciate you asking me to come.
Sure, Steve. Anytime you put out a book, you give me a call.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.